porte le mot. Je suis très heureux ce soir d'être accompagné des ministres Leblanc, Chino, Rodriguez. On est ici aujourd'hui pour parler des mesures de notre gouvernement pour protéger notre démocratie et nos institutions contre l'ingérence étrangère. In the last couple of weeks, Canadians have been hearing and reading a lot about the issue of attempted foreign interference, particularly from China, in our elections. There have been questions raised about our democracy, our national security agencies, our parliament, and even our sovereignty. These questions strike us to the very core as Canadians. Les Canadiens portent attention à ces questions parce qu'ils savent que protéger notre démocratie, c'est extrêmement important. We all agree that upholding confidence in our democratic process, in our elections, in our institutions, is of utmost importance. This is not and should never be a partisan issue. I understand that people want answers and Canadians deserve reassurance. I will get to the details in a moment, but today I'm announcing that I will be appointing an independent special rapporteur who will have a wide mandate and make expert recommendations on combating interference and strengthening our democracy. But first, I want to lay out some of what we've been doing and will do further to continue to protect our democracy and our institutions. In Canada, we believe deeply in the values of freedom, openness, and dialogue. These values are not universally shared by every government around the world. Indeed, I don't know if in our lifetime we've seen democracy in a more precarious place. Many state actors and non-state actors want to foster instability here and elsewhere to advance their own interests. We have long known, and an independent report confirmed it again last week, that the Chinese government and other regimes like Iran and Russia have attempted to interfere not just in our democracy, but in our country in general, whether it's our institutions, our businesses, our research facilities, or in the daily lives of our citizens. This is not a new problem. But before we came into office, there was no dedicated process to counter foreign interference in our elections. We saw the impacts of foreign interference in places like the United States and in France during their elections in 2016 and 2017. These threats evolve and continue to evolve. We took big steps to protect the integrity of our democracy. Things we did in response to the changes we saw around us, because that's what responsible leadership does. Lors des deux dernières élections, en 2019 et en 2021, un groupe non partisan de hauts fonctionnaires a déterminé que des tentatives d'ingérence n'ont pas compromis les résultats de nos élections. This panel is part of a mechanism, a protocol, that we created in early 2019 so that independent, expert public servants can communicate clearly and impartially with Canadians during an election in the event of incidents that threaten the integrity of the federal election. After 2019, the panel and the protocol were reviewed by James Judd, former director of CSIS. And after the 2021 election, the panel and the protocol were again reviewed, this time by Maurice Rosenberg, former senior deputy minister under both Conservative and Liberal governments. Both independent reviews made recommendations that we've studied closely. Between the 2019 and 2021 elections, using Mr. Judd's recommendations, we updated the protocol and strengthened it. We are now reviewing Mr. Rosenberg's recommendations, and Minister Leblanc is working on an implementation plan for as quickly as possible. Today, all political leaders agree that the election outcomes in 2019 and in 2021 were not impacted by foreign interference. Tous les chefs des autres partis sont d'accord que l'issue des élections de 2019 et 2021 n'a pas été impactée par une ingérence étrangère. But even if it didn't change the results of any of our elections, any interference attempt by any foreign actor is troubling and serious. Attempted interference is something that's been happening for a long time in Canada and in many other countries around the world. But how it happens is evolving, including with the rise of technology and social media. This is why, since 2015, we've taken big steps to protect the integrity of our democracy. In 2017, we created the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians so that top-secret cleared MPs and senators can look deeply into these issues. Le Comité des parlementaires sur la sécurité nationale et le renseignement réunit les représentants de tous les partis reconnus à la Chambre des communes ainsi que des représentants du Sénat. Ils détiennent tous une cote de sécurité de niveau très secret, de manière à pouvoir examiner les activités de nos organismes de sécurité nationale et du renseignement. NSICOP has examined foreign interference in the past and tabled a comprehensive report to the public and to Parliament. This report focused on the period between 2015 and 2018. They also looked at the classified report reviewing the work of the panel in the 2019 election. In 2018, we passed legislation to strengthen elections financing laws to keep foreign money out. And when we hosted the G7 summit that year in Charlevoix, we established the Rapid Response Mechanism as a way for the G7 countries to respond to diverse and evolving foreign threats to democracy. In 2019, we brought in our plan to protect democracy. This plan included the creation of the panel of independent public servants that I mentioned earlier. It also included the creation of the Security and Intelligence Threats to Election Task Force, which is made up of our top security agencies and advises the panel on potential threats. On a aussi créé l'Office de surveillance des activités en matière de sécurité nationale et de renseignement. L'OSSNR, NCIRA en anglais, est un organisme qui examine les activités liées à la sécurité nationale et au renseignement entreprises par le gouvernement. Et l'année dernière, on a déposé une nouvelle mesure législative pour protéger notre cybersécurité. These are only a few examples of what our government has done to address foreign interference since 2015, and we're working on doing more. But we have to make sure that we're taking responsible steps without jeopardizing the work of our intelligence community and nonpartisan officials to keep Canadians safe. Today I spoke with David McGuinty, the head of NSICOP, and with Marie Deschamps, the head of NCIRA. I underscored that Canadians need to have faith in their institutions and deserve answers and transparency. I talked with them about undertaking urgent work on the issue of foreign interference within their mandates. Aujourd'hui, j'ai parlé avec David McGuinty, président du CPSNR, et avec Marie Deschamps, présidente de l'OSSNR. J'ai souligné que les Canadiens doivent avoir confiance en leurs institutions et qui méritent des réponses et de la transparence. Je leur ai parlé d'entreprendre des démarches de toute urgence dans le dossier de l'ingérence étrangère dans le cadre de leur mandat. NSICOP includes representatives from all recognized parties in the House of Commons, plus representatives from the Senate. They all already have top secret clearances, so they can review the activities of our national security and intelligence agencies. NSICOP has already received the classified version of the report reviewing the work of the 2021 panel, and will be updating their last report reviewing foreign interference with a focus on our elections. When democratic institutions are under attack, it is just that it be parliamentarians, elected officials, who should be stepping up to protect those institutions. This is why we created NSICOP and gave them the tools to review these matters and report their findings and recommendations to Parliament. Cela is an external and independent expert body designed to review the collection and use of sensitive intelligence by government, including for all of our national security agencies, and ensure that they are meeting the high standards Canadians expect of them. They are well placed to determine how the system is working across intelligence agencies and government departments, what information flowed or didn't flow properly, and why. They also produce reports publicly to Parliament. Despite all of this, I know that there are people out there who don't believe that this is enough. And I get that. This is why we're entrusting further work to someone impartial. In the coming days, we will appoint an eminent Canadian to the position of independent special rapporteur, who will have a wide mandate to make expert recommendations on protecting and enhancing Canadians' faith in our democracy. In the coming weeks, the independent special rapporteur will be responsible for informing the work of Cela and NSICOP and any other existing processes like those by Elections Canada, and to identify any gaps in our system. The independent special rapporteur will make public recommendations which could include a formal inquiry or some other independent review process. Dans les prochains jours, on va nommer un éminent Canadien au poste de rapporteur spécial indépendant qui sera doté d'un vaste mandat afin de formuler des recommandations spécialisées sur la protection de notre démocratie. Dans les semaines à venir, le rapporteur spécial indépendant sera chargé d'orienter le travail de l'OSSNR et du CPSNR et celui effectué dans les autres processus en place, notamment à Élections Canada, en vue de cerner des lacunes dans notre système, s'il y en a. In the past few weeks, people have expressed many different views about the steps we should be taking to answer questions about foreign interference. To me, it comes down to two things: that our democratic institutions are safe from foreign interference, and that Canadians have confidence that it is so. This impartial, respected person will ensure transparency and also protection of our institutions, members of our intelligence agencies, and all Canadians. Now, some people have argued strongly that a public inquiry is the necessary next step. Some others have pointed out the flaws and challenges of a public inquiry. That's why we will ask the independent special rapporteur, as one of the first tasks of their mandate, to provide the government with a recommendation as to what the appropriate next step should be, whether it be an inquiry, an investigation, or a judicial review, and what the scope of that work may be. And we will abide by their recommendation. Comme je l'ai dit, on a fait beaucoup de travail, mais on sait qu'on peut continuer d'agir avec d'autres mesures dès maintenant pour protéger nos institutions, notre démocratie et les Canadiens contre l'ingérence étrangère. That's why I've tasked Minister Mendicino to launch, later this week, a consultation to guide how we will set up a new Foreign Influence Transparency Registry in Canada. We need to make sure there is transparency and accountability from those who advocate on behalf of foreign governments, while protecting communities who are often both targeted by attempts at foreign interference and who feel targeted when xenophobia and fear-mongering overtake legitimate concern for our democracy and national security. It's very important that we start with this consultation because we have to be mindful of history anytime we're talking about registries of foreigners in our country. I've also tasked Minister Mendicino to immediately establish a counter-foreign interference coordinator in Public Safety Canada. This office will ensure that we're taking on these issues across government in a coordinated way. J'ai demandé au ministre Mendicino de lancer plus tard cette semaine une consultation pour guider la mise en place d'un nouveau registre registre de transparence de l'influence étrangère au Canada. Je lui ai aussi demandé d'établir immédiatement au sein de Sécurité publique Canada un bureau national chargé de la coordination de la lutte contre l'ingérence étrangère. Ce bureau permettra de coordonner les efforts déployés dans l'ensemble du gouvernement pour s'attaquer à ces problèmes. I've also tasked Minister LeBlanc and the Clerk of the Privy Council to review and bring forward a plan to implement any outstanding recommendations from NSICOP, the Rosenberg Report, and any other reviews on these matters in the next 30 days. J'ai également chargé le ministre Leblanc et la greffière du Conseil privé de présenter un plan pour la mise en œuvre de toutes les recommandations en suspens formulées par le CPSNR et dans le rapport Rosenberg, ainsi que d'examiner ce plan et toute autre question connexe dans les 30 prochains jours. And finally, today I can announce that we're investing $5.5 million to build capacity of civil society organizations to combat disinformation. Because we know disinformation, often generated abroad, can be a real threat to our elections, and it's a threat that the federal government cannot combat alone. Je veux être très clair. Toute attaque ou tentative d'attaque contre notre démocratie est inacceptable. On va continuer de renforcer nos institutions afin de défendre leur intégrité. We will always stand firm when it comes to defending our national security. Just like we stood firm when we worked day and night to bring back the two Michaels after they were arbitrarily detained in China, including over the course of the 2019 and 2021 elections. As Canadians, we all felt a collective effort to work together to bring them home, and we felt tremendous relief when we finally got them home. But let's remember that throughout, there were repeated calls by eminent Canadians, both conservative and liberal, to simply capitulate to the Chinese government, to give in to their demands, to ignore our extradition treaty with the United States, and ignore the values and the principles of rule of law on which Canada is grounded. But we didn't. We stood strong as a government, we stood strong as Canadians for our values and for the rule of law, and we got them home that way. That's what a Prime Minister does. That's what responsible leadership is. Foreign interference is a complex landscape that should not be boiled down to sound bites and binary choices. And it should certainly not be about partisan politics. As politicians, we work hard on building trust with Canadians every single day. But it is also our duty to do everything we can so that Canadians can trust our institutions now and into the future. Because our institutions will and must outlast every politician. En tant que politicien, on travaille à chaque jour pour établir des liens de confiance avec les gens. Mais c'est aussi notre devoir de le faire de façon et de faire tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir pour susciter la confiance des Canadiens dans nos institutions, aujourd'hui et dans l'avenir. Our institutions are the foundations of our democracy. Even when they're strong, even when they're sturdy, if there's a perception that they might not be, it needs to be addressed. And we need to work beyond partisanship to work together. Canada is one of the most stable democracies in the world. But that didn't happen by accident, and it will not continue without effort. So to all Canadians, this is an issue that we continue to take extremely seriously. And we will continue this work to uphold and strengthen your confidence in our democracy in Canada. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci le Premier ministre. We have 20 minutes for questions from the media. Nous avons 20 minutes pour les questions des médias et on va commencer avec TVA.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau, Olivier Ferrand-Boissé de TVA. Vous savez, il y a plusieurs voix qui sont élevées là, pour une enquête publique. Et même Maurice Rosenberg, qui sur les ondes de CTV, a dit que vous devriez considérer cette enquête-là. Vous nous dites aujourd'hui que ce sera un comité dont les travaux seront secrets qui va enquêter. Donc, les Canadiens ne verront pas les travaux de ce comité-là. Croyez-vous réellement que c'est suffisant pour rassurer les Canadiens?
Ce que j'ai annoncé aujourd'hui, c'est qu'il y aura un rapporteur spécial indépendant qui se chargera de déterminer les prochaines étapes. C'est très clair que les Canadiens veulent que ça se fasse au-delà de la partisanerie, que ce ne soit pas un parti politique ou un autre qui décide des termes d'une enquête, si on en a besoin d'une, de comment on va rassurer les Canadiens sur l'intégrité de nos élections et de nos institutions face à l'ingérence étrangère, particulièrement chinoise dans ce cas-ci. C'est pour ça que le rapporteur spécial indépendant va regarder les différents comités que nous avons, les différents processus que nous avons, pour s'assurer qu'ils soient chargés des bonnes responsabilités, des bonnes actions pour rassurer les Canadiens et de voir s'il y a des lacunes ou des espaces où il va falloir qu'on en fasse plus. Et c'est cette personne-là, non partisane, experte, qui va déterminer les prochaines étapes dont les Canadiens ont besoin pour justement enlever la partisanerie de cet enjeu.
Qui sera ce rapporteur spécial? Comment sera-t-il nommé? Comment allez-vous vous assurer qu'il soit suffisamment indépendant pour que ces recommandations soient suffisamment crédibles?
Au courant des dernières semaines, on a vu beaucoup de Canadiens avec énormément d'expertise et d'autorité dans les matières de sécurité nationale, de notre démocratie. On a énormément de personnes éminentes et bien qualifiées pour pouvoir faire ce travail. Nous allons travailler pour s'assurer que cette personne-là soit réellement indépendante, experte et capable non seulement de s'assurer que notre gouvernement et nos institutions sont en train de faire tout ce qui est nécessaire pour protéger notre démocratie, mais qu'on puisse rassurer les Canadiens et que les gens aient confiance qu'effectivement, on est en train de faire tout ce qui est nécessaire pour protéger notre démocratie.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau, Mackenzie Gray. You mentioned that there have been a number of people who have been calling for a public inquiry. That includes the opposition and many other eminent Canadians. Can you explain why you need a special rapporteur to make that decision for you?
We've actually seen a significant amount of debate amongst experts, amongst prominent, eminent Canadians, some in political parties, some not, as to whether or not a public inquiry is the right way to move forward. And further, the question of what exactly would be the terms of any formal inquiry, what form it should take, what the Constitution should be, what the mandate and tasks should be, what kind of clearances it should have. All those questions are really important in going to establishing a body or a process that Canadians will have confidence in once it's done. We've seen a level of partisanship around this question that, for me, requires us to take a step back and to task an eminent, unimpeachable expert, respected and trusted by Canadians, to be able to make recommendations as to what the best path is forward. As I've said a number of times, we have a number of bodies, of task forces, of expert groups, from NSICOP to NCIRA to others, who have been tasked with keeping our democracy safe, protecting us from foreign interference. An independent expert to examine the landscape of everything that we have to fight against interference and give confidence to Canadians, make recommendations on how it must be optimized to deliver that confidence to Canadians, and what if necessary, we should be doing more, whether it be a formal inquiry, a commission, an examination, a panel of retired judges, a judicial review, or what have you. Making sure that that process, whatever process is necessary, is unimpeachable from the very beginning, is going to be part of reassuring Canadians that election integrity and foreign interference is something that, as a country, we are taking with the appropriate level of seriousness and rigor.
On NSICOP, we've already heard from Mr. Singh and Mr. Poilievre saying that that's not a process that they think for this situation makes sense. Mr. Singh says it's not public. Mr. Poilievre says it actually traps the MPs. They get secret information. They can't talk about it. Why do you think that's a proper venue to be able to handle these specific issues?
When I was in opposition, we watched Mr. Harper's government refuse to give any role to parliamentarians in matters of national security. Whether it was issues around Afghan detainees or other threats to national security, the answer invariably was, trust us, we're the government, we have clearance, we're going to keep Canadians safe. That was the answers that the government at the time, which included the current leader of the opposition, gave to us in opposition, gave to Canadians. We disagreed. One of our debates in the run-up to the 2015 election was over Bill C-51, national security, strengthening of national security rules. And one of the commitments we made to Canadians in that election is we would create what most other leading democracies already have, which is a national security and intelligence committee of parliamentarians. Parliamentarians from all different parties, including in the Senate, who would receive the necessary top secret clearances to dig into everything that our national security agencies did. Now, it doesn't surprise me that Mr. Poilievre continues to object to that creation. He was opposed to us empowering MPs to get those clearances to look into national security issues from even before we became government. But those MPs from all different parties get the necessary clearances to dive deep into the actions and responsibilities and mandates of our national security and intelligence agencies, and then they write reports on what they've seen, what they've learned, that get released to Parliament and to the public. So their threshold of being top secret cleared allows them to look into everything that's going on in our national security agencies and then turn to Canadians to say there are shortcomings in this aspect of what's happening, this aspect of things are being doing well, they need to improve this, they need to improve that. That's not secret. That is MPs doing their jobs, looking into top secret affairs and then creating a public report, evaluating the work of our national security agencies and highlighting where there need to be improvements that they're then accountable to, because NSICOP will be looking into them again in the coming years, and parliamentarians will continue to report publicly on the work they do. Yes, it's a committee of parliamentarians with top secret clearances, but their work is to dig into the top secret work being done by our intelligence agencies and tell all Canadians about whether that's being done right or wrong and how it needs to be improved. That misunderstanding of the nature of NSICOP is something that hopefully this important work that they continue to do will shed a little more light on for more Canadians.
CTV News. So what can the Canadian public realistically expect from this NSICOP report? And will it be sufficient enough to alleviate the concerns of 7 in 10 Canadians who think this is a major threat and a major issue?
The announcement today is on a special rapporteur. Special independent rapporteur who will be charged with looking over the entire landscape of Canada's national security agencies and tools to counter foreign interference. That includes NSICOP, it includes NCIRA, it includes Elections Canada inquiries or investigations into election. It includes any other part of what the government does to counter foreign interference. This special rapporteur will have the clearances and the power to look at everything that Canada is doing and has done and make recommendations on what we need to do further, including, if necessary, a formal inquiry or commission or whatever they determine is the right thing to do. That's where Canadians can have confidence that we are removing this from the political parties, including the political party that happens to be in government right now, and saying this is a matter that all Canadians, regardless of who they voted for or didn't vote for, should be able to be reassured is the right process to examine what is a very concerning issue around foreign interference, but that has been elevated to a level of partisan disagreements that has made it difficult for any party, including the party in government, to reassure Canadians that whatever we're doing is going to be enough and sufficient. That's where a special rapporteur to come in and survey the landscape and ensure that everything we do will be sufficient to reassure Canadians that our democracy remains strong and that the tools we have to counter ongoing foreign interference are the right ones.
You announced that you'll be starting consultations on a foreign agent registry. Why did it take your government so long to do that, given that our U.S. and Australian counterparts already have one in place? And what's the timeline on when you will have one?
It is something that has long been discussed. There are lessons to be learned about the impact and effectiveness of what some of our allies are doing and have done. Of course, we're learning from them, and we're consulting with Canadians to make sure that as we move forward, it be both effective and impactful. But I'm happy to turn it over to Minister Mendicino to follow up on that a little bit. Marco.
Yes, and thank you for the question. First, I think it's very important that we signal our intent to launch a consultation, a public engagement on the potential creation of a foreign agent registry. As the Prime Minister has said, as we embark on this dialogue, it is important that we bring along all communities and Canadians. It is important that we embed in this instrument the values of the Charter, which must be a bedrock in the way in which we strike the balance of protecting our institutions, but doing so in a manner that fully respects the individual rights and values of every Canadian. The last thing I'll say before turning it back to you, Prime Minister, is that this latest step builds on the concrete actions of this government since we took the reins in 2015. And it is important that all of the tools that we have put into place are attached to the corresponding transparency that is required of them as we imbue them to our national security agencies. It is imperative that this work is done responsibly, and this conversation will help to advance that work.
Thank you. Next question.
Émilie Bergeron, La Presse canadienne. Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Dans le cas de la commission Rouleau, il y a eu des questions qui touchaient la sécurité nationale. Il y a eu des documents qui n'ont pas pu être dévoilés. Ça n'a pas empêché le commissaire de faire son travail et d'apprendre des nouvelles choses. Là, on a entendu certains de vos députés dire, avec une commission d'enquête publique, dans ce cas-ci, on n'en apprendrait pas nécessairement plus parce qu'il est question de la sécurité nationale. Il faut préserver ces informations-là. Donc, c'est quoi la différence entre la commission Rouleau et ce cas-ci présent?
C'est une très bonne question et d'ailleurs, la commission Rouleau a souligné des préoccupations par rapport à la mésinformation, la désinformation, l'influence étrangère qui va être pertinente au travail que le rapporteur spécial indépendant est en train de faire pour regarder quel genre d'enquête, si on a besoin d'une enquête publique et quels devraient être les termes de cette enquête publique. Mais je sais très bien que si j'avais annoncé une enquête publique, ce qui aurait été une décision assez facile politiquement pour faire, parce que tout le monde est en train de vouloir la faire, dès qu'on arriverait à un moment où je dois dire « Ah non, mais on ne peut pas vous donner ces documents-ci, ces documents-là », l'indépendance de ce processus et l'efficacité, l'impact de ce processus aurait été miné, la crédibilité aurait été minée de façon assez sérieuse. Donc, pour moi, de donner la responsabilité d'établir quel genre de commission, pour avoir une commission, la recommandation pourrait être une commission très semblable à ce qu'a fait le commissaire Rouleau. Si c'est ça que le rapporteur spécial indépendant détermine serait la bonne marche à suivre, ce serait ça qu'on fera. Donc, étant donné les limites et les lacunes de ce processus-là, peut-être qu'il va choisir une autre façon de rassurer les Canadiens par rapport à l'ingérence étrangère. Mais la réalité, c'est que de demander à quelqu'un d'impartial et d'expert de pouvoir établir ses paramètres et établir ses processus, souligner et élever d'abord les processus qui existent déjà pour répondre à ces questions qu'on a et en ajouter si nécessaire, c'est la façon, je pense, pour s'assurer que le Canada est en train de faire tout ce qui est nécessaire pour protéger nos institutions et notre démocratie, et deux, de rassurer les Canadiens qu'on est en train de faire tout ce travail-là de la bonne façon.
Sur la nomination du rapporteur, on a entendu, par exemple, le Bloc québécois demander que pour une éventuelle commission d'enquête, que le commissaire soit nommé avec l'accord de tous les partis. Dans le cas du rapporteur, est-ce que vous avez l'intention de consulter les autres partis?
Oui, on va absolument consulter les autres partis. On va être ouvert à toutes sortes de suggestions qu'ils auraient à offrir de personnes éminentes et crédibles qui pourraient très bien faire ce travail.
Prochaine question.
Yeah, Brian Kelty, National Post. Sir, NSI COP has existed since 2017 when your government brought it in power. It has made many recommendations across many reports, and it has complained that it does not receive responses from your government, that many of those recommendations come unanswered. And the same is true of James Judd's report after the 2019 election. Many of his recommendations have not been responded to. So why is this time going to be different?
Actually, following the Judd report in the 2019 election, we did move ahead significantly with a number of his recommendations, and they were integrated into the panel in 2021. When we created NSI COP in 2017, it was a brand new institution in Canada. The previous Conservative government had refused to give parliamentarians from opposition parties the security clearances necessary to oversee and look into the actions of our national security agencies. And we felt that was a weakness, which is why we brought in a National Security Committee composed of parliamentarians from all parties who could lean in directly on what our national security agencies and report back to Parliament what they'd found, what was working, what was not, and make recommendations. Indeed, we have to do a better job of following up on those recommendations. I fully accept that. That is why I've tasked Minister LeBlanc within 30 days to put forward a response to the recommendations made by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, among other reports that still hadn't been responded to.
NSI COP reports can also be edited by your government. You hold the right to remove details from that, and you have done that in previous reports. Are you going to take a lighter approach on this report, given the importance to the Canadian public?
That's an excellent question, because it is something that concerns Canadians, and I can reassure people that redactions or edits to reports for security purposes are not done by politicians. They are done by the professional public service along very specific objective criteria. We do not redact those reports. The professional public service does.
Next question.
Steve Chase, Globe and Mail. Thanks for taking our questions. Last week at the Prop Committee, Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP told MPs that they're not investigating any allegations of election interference in the 2019 or 2021 elections. Today, however, we learned the RCMP is investigating the leaks. They're investigating those, and they've given a statement to media. So I want to ask you, did your office, your government, refer the matter to the RCMP? No. And do you think it's the appropriate focus to focus on the leaks as opposed to the allegations?
First of all, it is not appropriate for politicians to direct our police services to do or to not do investigations. We can certainly ask, but the RCMP makes its determinations based on what they have. And I can assure you that the RCMP was fully up on concerns around foreign interference because the task force, because of the work the panel did, they looked into these issues in 2019 and 2021 and made a determination to not pursue any criminal investigations. They are now deciding to pursue a criminal investigation or an investigation into the various national security breaches that we've seen over the past months. And that is their decision to do. One of the strengths of Canada is the independence of our institutions, and knowing that politicians can't direct or prevent RCMP or other police agencies from doing their jobs of keeping Canadians safe and making sure that the law is upheld.
When we started reporting on these reports, intelligence reports from CSIS, you said that foreign interference is something you're well familiar with and you've been dealing with it for a long time. Last week, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs was asked how many Chinese diplomats have been expelled in the last 4 years, and the answer was 0. Can you explain why there's not been one single Chinese diplomat expelled over the last 4 years?
Anytime we are presented with evidence, we act. If we have been presented with credible evidence of wrongdoing, of foreign agents or officials breaking Canadian laws, we would have acted. Lack of evidence means we have not acted. We are a country of laws, of rules, of evidence, and if we do not get concrete, clear evidence, we will not take action. That's what Canadians expect. But I can highlight that neither the Foreign Minister nor I have ever been accused of being shrinking violence when it comes to standing up for our values and our country with foreign dignitaries or interlocutors or even leaders. We will consistently stand up for what Canadians believe in and what our values are, because that's what people elected us to do.
We have time for one more question and one more follow-up.
Madeleine Desmorin, Radio-Canada. Monsieur Trudeau, vous avez dit que ce serait facile de déclencher une enquête publique. Tout le monde me le demande, mais on n'aurait pas confiance nécessairement dans la suite. Alors, pourquoi ne pas déclencher une enquête publique et demander à votre rapporteur spécial d'en déterminer les termes? Ça nous ferait gagner du temps.
Parce que c'est possible, et en écoutant les experts qui ont des perspectives différentes, que la meilleure façon de rassurer les Canadiens et d'assurer qu'on est en train de faire tout ce qui est nécessaire pour contrer l'ingérence étrangère, peut-être que la meilleure façon, ce n'est pas d'avoir une enquête publique. Et c'est pour ça que nous avons choisi de nommer un rapporteur spécial indépendant qui va pouvoir regarder tout ce qu'on est en train de faire pour contrer l'ingérence étrangère, tous les outils qu'on a créés au sein de ce gouvernement pour protéger nos institutions et notre démocratie, et voir exactement ce qu'ils devraient être en train de faire pour contrer l'ingérence, pour rassurer les Canadiens, et qu'est-ce qu'on devrait faire en plus, que ce soit une enquête publique ou une commission formelle ou un panel de juges ou n'importe quoi. On va donner tous les outils et toute la capacité à cette personne experte et indépendante de regarder tout ce qu'on a et prendre le choix de la meilleure façon de rassurer les Canadiens. C'est bien possible que ce soit une chose ou une autre que les gens ont suggéré récemment. Mais c'est pour ça qu'on pense que sur un enjeu aussi important que cette question d'ingérence et de la confiance que les gens ont dans leur démocratie, on est mieux de prendre quelques semaines pour s'assurer qu'on est en train de faire la meilleure chose, la bonne chose, pour protéger nos institutions et notre démocratie et rassurer les Canadiens. Et c'est exactement ce que le rapporteur spécial va faire.
Quelques semaines, M. Trudeau, donc c'est combien de semaines il aura devant lui et combien de semaines de consultation aussi avant de voir une décision sur les agents étrangers?
Par rapport au rapporteur spécial, on est en train de travailler maintenant pour nommer la bonne personne et on s'attend aussi à ce que le travail que ce rapporteur spécial indépendant fait sera constant. Ce ne sera pas une attente jusqu'à l'été avant d'entendre les premières recommandations. Dès que ce rapporteur spécial verra des choses qui doivent être faites, des choses qui doivent être améliorées, il va faire des recommandations immédiatement et on va s'y engager immédiatement. Donc, on veut que ça se passe le plus rapidement possible. Les Canadiens sont inquiets et avec raison de toute cette ingérence chinoise et autres qui se passe dans notre démocratie et ils veulent être rassurés rapidement qu'on est en train de tout faire pour les protéger, pour protéger notre démocratie. Par rapport à la consultation sur le registre?
Oui, très rapidement. On va commencer le processus de consultation cette semaine, un peu plus tard, mais je veux rassurer tout le monde que le bon travail a déjà commencé avec l'implémentation de beaucoup des outils comme NCCOP, comme NCIRA, comme les mesures pour CISES pour réduire les menaces posées par l'ingérence étrangère et des autres. Et on va ramener tout le monde dans cette conversation nationale. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Ça va mettre fin aux conférences de presse. Thank you everyone. That will conclude today's press conference.
Merci tout le monde. Merci.